Welcome to today's session. So we are excited to have Seth Robinson back with us from Comptia, and thank you so much to both Seth and Comptia for sharing this new presentation with us. Seth is the Senior Director of Technology Analysis at Comptia. He's going to spend the next 30 minutes highlighting the basics on the 4 key pillars in the complex world of information technology, which encompasses infrastructure, software development, information security, which is growing rapidly, as well as data. So again, if you've got questions, enter those into the chat box. We'll address these at the end. So thanks, Seth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and a real pleasure to share this new stuff with you. You and I were talking right before we got started, and we worked on this over really the first half of this year, really trying to dig into it and understand what IT operations looked like. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One, internally, we had some discussions going on that made us want to try to uncover this. But secondly, it's come up a lot in discussions that I've had with some nonprofits, with other members of ours, with other companies, just this notion of needing to understand what is going into IT today, or what it takes to build out these systems that we're talking about, so that we can start thinking about especially the skills that are needed, but also some of the other components that go into creating all of the technology that we know and love today. So like you said, today's technology seems very complex, and I think some of the new trends that have come in have been very additive instead of replacing old systems that we had. So you've got all these new layers coming onto a technology stack, and you also have lots and lots of people accessing technology because it's becoming more user-friendly and it's becoming more accessible. And so you've got people using things and definitely integrating technology into their lives and into business plans and strategies, but there's not really an easy button. As much as user interface has changed, and technology has become a little bit more accessible, there's still a lot of complexity underneath. And once you start trying to build out these systems or get people trained to do this work, then you run into this complexity. And so what we were trying to do with this is unravel some of that complexity and get down to the basic components that would be used in an IT department. And so to do this work, we relied on a lot of our past research. And then we also went out and started talking to people. These were CIOs or IT directors at a variety of different companies, different sized companies. And with all of that data and input, we formed these 4 pillars of IT that seem to be the ones that most companies are centering around as they build out their systems. And so those 4 pillars are infrastructure, development, security, and data. And I'll walk through these kind of quickly, and I'll kind of walk through this whole presentation a little quickly since we just have half an hour today. There's a lot of depth here, but a lot of that depth is what we get into with our research. And so what I want to try to do here is just provide a very high-level view of what these 4 buckets are and how they combine and create the systems that businesses need today. So the infrastructure bucket is the first one, and it's kind of the longest standing member of this group, going back to the days that IT got started in businesses with mainframes around the 1950s or 1960s. The primary function that was happening there was an infrastructure function, simply maintaining these servers and eventually maintaining networks so that the data could be transported and the data could be acted upon. And so this is the one that we've had for the longest time, and partly because of that, this is what people tend to think of if they're thinking of IT. They think about the people that are doing server administration or network administration, real hardcore technical people working with hardware that is doing computing activity. The other thing that comes into this bucket as you talk to a lot of companies is help desk, and help desk tends to be managed differently than some of the back office stuff gets managed, but they're kind of part and parcel of the same function. help desk being that front line of defense as users are trying to work through problems and they encounter things either with their front-end devices or possibly with some of those back-end things. And so as I talked to people and they said that help desk was something separate, they eventually got to a point of saying it's really all together, and help desk is a great entry point into that infrastructure function, which becomes kind of interesting with the other three buckets, and we'll see that a little bit later. So that's the infrastructure function, and for most of the infrastructure function, it relies on hardware, and it's dealing with hardware. The software side is what we see in the development function. And so in this pillar, you've got people that are designing products that would get used by their companies, which is a little different than designing a product that would be for sale to outside customers. That would probably be a separate group, and these two groups are probably going to interact closely, but it's not going to be quite the same. When we're talking about internal IT here, the development that gets done on products is development that's getting done on products that a company uses internally. And this function has accelerated quite a bit in recent years, partly because of the internet, as companies have built out not only their web presence and the way that they're presenting themselves to the outside world online, but also as they build out actual applications and as they start to maybe turn some of their workflow through web applications so that it's a little easier to access from different systems. Internet development, web development has really taken a step forward. And then, of course, mobile development has accelerated this even further. Companies are really interested in reaching those mobile customers. They're really interested in having internal employees be productive with their mobile devices. And they're finding very quickly that that's not just about distributing those devices, but it's about creating the apps and the connections to make the work be productive and efficient. So all of that software activity happens within development. The other two pillars tend to be offshoots of the first two pillars. And so security tends to come out of the infrastructure function. Traditionally, security has been very technology focused as companies have tried to build a secure perimeter using a firewall or using antivirus for their endpoints and just try to create this secure environment for corporate work to get done. With cloud and mobility, that picture is changing, and a secure perimeter might be still a necessary piece, but not a sufficient piece for an overall security posture. So companies, in addition to the technology, are having to think about the processes that they have inside of a business, which might include things like risk analysis or compliance with different governmental regulations. And they're also having to think a lot about end user education because they're distributing technology very widely inside the organization, but they're finding that the technology literacy might not be exactly where it needs to be, and certainly the security literacy is not quite where it needs to be. So all of these things are happening within security, and because it's moving a little bit away from a technology-centric function, we see companies start to peel out security and have employees that are dedicated to thinking about security 100% of the time. Similarly, data would come out of the development function, and it's kind of a specialization of that function. A lot of companies today, if they have a database administrator, have that person sitting inside of a development team, and they're handling all the data, but it's still seen as kind of a development function. As big data starts to drive things forward, as the Internet of Things creates new sources of data that need to be analyzed, companies are starting to see a need for carving out that data discipline as something separate. And so you would have not only the database administrators, but also people doing heavy-duty analytics and also creating some kind of visualizations so that the decision makers can see the results of the data analytics very easily and make their decisions. So these are the four pillars. And again, as I talked to company after company, these were the ones that came up. And obviously not every company has these as standalone teams. You won't go to every company and see four distinct teams that are dealing with these functions. But we've gotten here a few examples of some ways that companies might be organized. And so starting with the smallest company, if a very small firm has a technical team at all, it's probably going to be primarily an infrastructure team, simply dealing with the equipment, dealing with the networks, making sure that everything stays up and running, maybe not necessarily doing things that are strategic with that technology, but just making sure that tactically it's operational. To the degree that security and data are handled inside the company, those responsibilities will fall to the single team, and there typically won't be any development at all. Any development would be outsourced, even if that's building a web page. It's probably not going to be a great deal of development work because that tends to be more of a sophisticated activity, but you really won't have development within this infrastructure group. They'll just be dealing with security and handling data at the very basic levels that it needs to be handled. As you grow out of that very smallest company and get into other SMB type firms, this was actually probably the most common format that I saw out there. And it was a little surprising to me because within our membership and within the IT channel, we don't talk as much about software development, and so I didn't think of it as being such a strong component for so many businesses, but a large number of the companies that I talked to said that they have an infrastructure team dealing with the hardware, doing all the traditional tasks, and then a development team doing some amount of customization or trying to create a more sophisticated approach to technology. And so they've got these two teams, and one of the large reasons that they've got these two teams separately is because the behaviors between these groups and the mindset and the approach to work are very different between the two. We'll talk about skills a little bit later, and we'll kind of talk about how these tend to be very distinct groups, and there's not a lot of crosstalk between them in terms of one employee that can do the whole set of activities, but there does have to be some overlap. And here, the secondary functions of data and security are kind of handled in that overlap. They're not handled distinctly, and probably security gravitates a little bit towards infrastructure and data gravitates a little bit towards development, but those things are handled jointly between these two standalone teams. Continuing to move up in the world, you can have these teams that would change in size. Obviously, the teams aren't always going to be the same size. And this is a picture that was fairly easy for me to draw because this represents Comptia's structure. We have an infrastructure team, and as much as we do with security is mostly handled by that team. We have a separate development team doing a lot of internal things. And then we have a separate data team because we've got our member database. There's a lot of different actions that we're trying to take on that member database, and so we've needed to carve out data separately. And so as companies are moving from that single team or that dual team approach into this eventual model of having all four teams standalone, you're going to get one team or the other to pull out from infrastructure and development. And I think a lot of companies that I talked to said that they will probably see security being the first team that will pull out separately, but for us and for some other companies, that data function is the first one to form. And then finally, the largest companies look like this today. They've got all four teams standalone. They've got people at the top of each of these teams managing the function and reporting up into a CIO or an IT director. And all four of these things operate somewhat independently in order to produce the ultimate result for the business. Of course, these pillars don't operate completely independently, and the places where they overlap is where we get two other functions that frequently came up in my discussions. So each of these overlaps has its own characteristics. There are 6 distinct overlaps between the 4 groups, and you may have heard of the first one up in the upper left. The overlap between infrastructure and development is typically called Devops, and it's a discipline that has become very popular as companies are trying to speed up the cycle time of their development process and make sure that development is as agile and nimble as possible. So they are trying to very closely match what's happening in the development world to the actual architecture that they have and build out that architecture also to meet development needs. And so there's entire seminars and job skills around DevOps but it comes from this overlap between two of the primary pillars. With infrastructure and security, layering these different technology tools is something that's always been done, and so it continues to be a part of security as companies try to build out their technology pieces to fit their security profile. Between infrastructure and data, one of the biggest things that we see happening as companies pursue new trends is that they need to build out their networks more. And certainly all of that comes back to the amount of data that's trying to flow through these networks. And so as companies pursue cloud computing or Internet of Things or mobility, they're finding that even if their network is relatively recent, there are typically some upgrades needed in order to deal with issues like redundancy and bandwidth. And then moving over to the right-hand side, between development and security, and really between security and data, those two things are overlapping more as systems are moving into the cloud. And so as systems are moving outside of that secure perimeter into cloud environments, companies are finding that the applications and the data have to have their own layer of security. They're not just residing inside of a secure environment anymore. And so as they move to the cloud, some security has to be built into both the software that's running and the data that's sitting in storage. And so security overlaps with development in trying to figure out how to create secure applications, and it overlaps with data in deciding how to keep an eye on that data as it's either sitting in storage, as it's moving from one place to another, or as it's getting used by someone. And then the last overlap between development and data is coming as companies are looking at data and trying to use those insights in many cases to try to automate things or to try to speed things up. And so that data insight is being built into application development, sometimes as the applications are being developed, and sometimes in automated ways, like through machine learning or machine-to-machine communication. And so development and data, they've got that tight synergy already, but this is the place where they overlap. And so all of these overlaps lead to the need for project management. And that project management might sit inside IT or outside IT and serve the whole company, but many people told me that some level of project management is needed. And then as the overlaps continue to happen between all four of the pillars, that project management grows up and becomes executive management, like a CIO or an IT director, someone that understands the technical pieces, but who also understands the business and can make the priority calls and the trade-offs that need to be made in order for that ultimate goal to be met using the technology that's available. So what I'll walk through now is a topic that kind of sparked this whole thing for us internally. We were looking at something like cloud, very specifically, and saying, what are companies doing with cloud? As they need new cloud skills or as they're trying to deal with cloud, are they building out new centers of excellence, or are they hiring new skills, and where do those skills sit? And what we found, and I'll walk through a few examples of this pretty quickly, is these new topics don't create new pillars. They simply impact the pillars that already exist. So for cloud, you look at the infrastructure team, and the infrastructure team is asking, how can I take the workloads that always used to run on-premise and run them in the cloud, and maybe use the cloud to make those workloads more efficient, and then tie those workloads back to anything else that might be happening on-premise. And they don't build out a separate team to do this, but they may build some new skills within the infrastructure function. The development group, especially with cloud, is learning how to become more nimble and maybe build out some of their environments and test sites in the cloud, rather than spend the capital to create these on-premise architectures that could be very flexible, and so they're using the cloud for that. With the security team, I've already mentioned they have to look at the applications and the data as they begin traveling outside of the company walls. And then with the data team, many companies are finding that their data is a little bit scattered through different departments. And so as they want to bring that together, can they use the cloud to do that? With mobility, it's the same thing. The infrastructure team starts with looking at this question of how do these devices get delivered. Does the company do that, or do we go with a BYOD policy and we allow employees to bring in their own and they look at the pros and cons and they make a decision? The development team is very busy trying to optimize things for that mobile environment. The security team, once that device delivery mechanism has been decided, they're figuring out how to deal with endpoint security and maybe how to deal with data encryption. And then the data team figures out which data can actually be allowed to live on mobile devices rather than live in the cloud or continue to live on premise and only be operated on by those mobile devices. And then finally, Internet of Things. We just completed a whole study around Internet of Things, but just like the other two, it impacts these pillars rather than creating something new. And so infrastructure, we talked already about the need for the network to support all these new connected devices. Development needs to figure out how exactly these devices can communicate with each other and do that in an automatic way. One big thing with security is dealing with new vendors, and so you've probably seen headlines around something like a baby monitor that hackers are getting into and able to see what that baby monitor is showing and maybe able to talk through the baby monitor. The vendor of that baby monitor never had to think about internet security before they created a connected device. Now they have to think about it, and they probably don't have all the skills that they necessarily need. So that's a huge thing for IoT. And then with data, these are new types of data that are coming in from these devices, and they look different than a lot of traditional corporate data. And so the challenge is in making all of those things work together seamlessly. So we stay with these four pillars. As much as there are new trends coming in, the challenge is in figuring out how these pillars respond to the new trends, and a lot of that is in skill development. And so, again, I mentioned before, one of our initial thoughts was to try to figure out what the pathways might be between these pillars as someone was trying to build out their skills and become more well-rounded. And what we found is that people don't typically move between these pillars, especially between the infrastructure and security side and the data and development side. I talked to a lot of people that said, sure, I've got someone that can really grow within the infrastructure pillar. I've got someone that might specialize inside the infrastructure pillar in security and move into that area, but I'm not going to see someone move from the infrastructure side and become a developer or become a data analyst. It's just different personality types, different behaviors, different skill sets, and we don't see that movement very often. And so what we're focused on is the skills within these pillars and how exactly we can grow them and how we can add on new skills that help someone like a system administrator really deal with cloud environments or really deal with the Internet of Things without necessarily carving that out and making it a separate discipline. We want to tie everything back to things that have already existed. And so you can see here some examples of job roles that might sit in any of these four pillars. And if you search on, the top technology jobs, you'll typically see titles like this or new titles that you could then place into one of these pillars. So I want to just kind of close here by talking a little bit about Comptia and what we're doing in each of these areas, or give an example of what we're doing in each of these areas, because I'm sure that not everyone on the call is familiar with Comptia and what we do. We're a trade association for the IT industry, and we primarily deal with certifications for IT pros and then a membership side for companies that are within the IT channel. And a lot of our certifications land on the infrastructure side, including security in that infrastructure pillar. Our big certification that most people know us by is A+, and that's a help desk cert. And I think one of the challenges for us is to think about if A+ gets someone started in help desk and that helps them get started in infrastructure, what do we need, or what does the industry need for the other three pillars to help people get started in those? And one of the parts of that challenge is that there currently isn't a real parallel to help desk in the other three pillars, especially in security, and data. And so that's an area that we really want to explore as we continue to build out our certifications. On the development side, we have a philanthropic arm inside Comptia called Creating IT Futures. They run a lot of programs trying to help get people into some of these jobs that might not know about them very much. They might be underrepresented minorities or females that are trying to get into technology. And so the Dev Prep program is something that Creating IT Futures is exploring to give people kind of a pre-apprenticeship into development and just learn some of the basics, learn what development is all about, and then move into coding in a specific language. One of the things we have inside of our membership is communities that center around different topics, and one of those, probably one of the strongest ones, is our IT security community. They look a lot at the business of selling security solutions, but they also talk a lot about what a proper security solution looks like today, whether you're trying to sell that or whether you're trying to build it internally. And then around data, we do a lot with advocacy. We have a whole advocacy team in Washington, D.C. working on issues of technology and issues for small businesses as they deal with technology. And one of the biggest issues is around data and the handling of data, especially as companies move to cloud providers and their data starts to spread out and maybe get into different states that handle their data differently. Our advocacy team is on top of that and trying to make that consistent so that small businesses don't have a huge burden to bear as they're trying to figure out what to do. So that was a very quick overview of our new IT framework. If you go to comptia.org and become a registered user there, which is free and is just a simple registration, you can get access to the entire white paper that walks through a little bit more depth on all these things. You can also get access to a lot of our research. Most of the technology pieces that I've authored are available for registered users. And then we've got a few pieces that are available only to Premier members within the IT channel, but those typically deal with channel business. And so a lot of our trend information, a lot of our technology research is available for free to all registered users. So that is all I have today. Very quickly, I don't have a slide in here with my contact information, but I'll just share it with you here. You can reach me on Twitter at Seth D. Robinson. And if you want to send me an email, it's srobinson@comptia.org. So in the last couple minutes, Erica, I don't know if we've got any questions or any thoughts that you have that would add on to this, but open it up for any questions.
No, I think this was great and extremely helpful with kind of developing an initial knowledge base. One suggestion I will give, because I've gotten a ton personally out of it, is to also sign up for the Comptia Newsletters. Again, Comptia is a nonprofit IT trade association, so just so many really solid educational resources at everyone's disposal for free. And so again, I definitely endorse their newsletter. If you've got questions, enter those now. I'm not seeing any currently, but you can also email me those as well, or tweet at Seth, or just send me a message, and we'll make sure that we distribute any follow-up questions. So I see, to enter a question, okay, so we have one, I think. Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I'll be signing up at Comptia, looking forward to learning more. Okay, so just a comment. Thanks, Marcia, for that. But no, this was great. So again, Seth, thank you. Thanks, Comptia, for sharing this knowledge with our community, and have a good rest of your week, all. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks very much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.